and welcome to the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz, and today we are continuing our 32 for 32 series with a look at the Los Angeles Rams, already making big-time moves in the offseason. If you've been living under a rock, they have traded Jared Goff, 2 first-round picks, and a third-round pick for Mr. Matthew Stafford. So exciting times with an already, good to great, I think we can all say great football team. Now, certainly anyone's idea of a Super Bowl contender if they were not already. So I have a very, very special guest to help break down Los Angeles Rams. That is staff editor and NFL writer at the Athletic L.A. and also co-host of the 11 Personnel podcast, Rich Hammond, who you can find on Twitter at Rich_Hammond. Rich, thank you for the time and happy offseason.
Hey, yeah, Ian, here we are, right? I mean, it goes so fast. Before you know, it'll be the free agency and the draft and training camp. It's awesome. I love covering the NFL because there's always something going on. So it's good to be with you.
There is always something, man. You said it right. And, I don't have time to focus on these other beta sports like baseball and basketball. Okay, I'm being a hater, but truly we can't talk about football all day, every day. And that is usually what we do here on the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. So per usual, we'll be going through 3 team needs for the Rams. I'll hit Rich with a gut feel round because, again, we are recording this on February 2nd. So maybe he is Nostradamus, but right now just getting the early offseason agenda look, and then we'll get out of here after a bold offseason take. So without further ado, Rich, hit me with your top 3 team needs for the Rams ahead of 2021 offseason.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see kind of where they go with free agency. First of all, I mean, they're so far over the salary cap right now that they're going to have to reconcile a lot of that. And does that mean having to cut a couple guys, maybe replacing them with cheaper options? It certainly kind of precludes you from re-signing some of those defensive free agents, I think, when you're talking about John Johnson and Leonard Floyd, maybe even a Troy Hill at cornerback. They're probably going to have to make some tough decisions there. So the landscape of this team could change a little bit over the next couple of weeks. But one thing I would point to first of all is look at receiver. I mean, that's an interesting situation because you look at that and they think you already have Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp, so you're pretty much set there, right? But they want to get that deep element back into their game and that they lacked without having Brandon Cooks or without having Sammy Watkins from the year before. So whether that's through the draft or whether it's through free agency or maybe even a trade, I tend to think it'll be the draft more than anything. I think they have to get somebody in there who can bring a little bit of that element too. So that's one area. I would look maybe at tight end. Also, I don't think they're going to bring back Gerald Everett, also another salary cap kind of casualty, I guess you would say. So maybe they need a little bit more depth there because they don't have a lot behind Tyler Higbee. They drafted Bryson Hopkins last year. They like the way that he projects, but he's maybe not ready to step into that role necessarily in 2021. And then you have to look at the offensive line and how that shakes out. I mean, Andrew Whitworth looks like he's going to be back in 2021, but that's no certainty. He's got a very high cap figure. He's over $11 million in cap in 2021, which given some of their issues, that's a really big number. So if they can make that work with him, that's great. Does it cost them potentially a Rob Havenstein on the other side? That's a possibility. But I think that's another area where they need to look at upgrading or at least making some changes.
Yeah, I think looking back at, this time last year, the big miss I had on the Rams was I just didn't think their offensive line would be very good because they went from being just one of the most historically great units we've really ever seen in that 2017-2018 run, lost a lot of pieces and decided not to really address the position group in the draft or free agency last year. They just kind of built guys up within. Well, those guys performed just fine last year, but to your point, might have to cut some of those other guys. But do you probably see them with the offensive line in particular and them being this cap stretch, like they're probably going to have to address this unit through the draft?
Yeah, I would think so. And it's hard to do that. I mean, especially talk about those tackle positions. It's hard to go out and just sign somebody who you can step in. I mean, those guys don't grow on trees. And when they are available, they're pretty expensive if they're worthy of putting in there. So that's why I still think it's still probably their best option to stay with Andrew Whitworth, even though he's 39 years old now. And there's that comes with its own set of risks. But they did a good job in sticking with and developing some of those those young guys like Austin Blythe and Austin Corbett did a nice job this year. So they've got a couple other guys, Bobby Evans, David Edwards. They like those young guys too. But the depth, I think, could stand to improve there. And then, what they do with Rob Havenstein on the right side, that's a pretty high cap figure. And I don't know, given some of their other issues, whether or not they can afford that. And if they can't, then you definitely need that depth.
Yeah, I mean, it's always fun to look at the flashy skill position players. We got to make sure they got that O-line all sound and solid at the line of scrimmage as well. I want to circle back to where you're talking about in defense because, Troy Hill, Darius Williams, John Johnson, Leonard Floyd, all these guys could potentially be leaving. And I understand part of that is just, hey, you're building your offense around two of the single best talents in the league in Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey. So, I'm sure this isn't really coming as a surprise to the Rams. But with that said, where do you think they might try to focus the number 3 piece in the secondary or more in the pass rush?
Yeah, probably in the pass rush because they still, even if you talk about some of these guys potentially leaving, they have some pretty good depth at safety. I mean, Jordan Fuller was a guy who stepped in and played very well as a 6th-round pick. They still have Taylor Rapp, who was just a 2nd-round pick a couple of years ago. He's had some injury issues, so you haven't really heard his name a whole lot, but he's a guy who can step in and play well. And then, they're pretty solid at cornerback. Again, even if they lose a Troy Hill, you still obviously have Jalen Ramsey and you have Darius Williams, who played very well this year, and you have a couple other guys, David Long Jr., who they think pretty highly of. So I think they're pretty good there. It's that pass rush where you, especially if Leonard Floyd doesn't come back, which I think he's going to get paid somewhere else more than the Rams can afford, then they need to replace that. And there's not a whole lot of internal. Terrell Lewis is a guy who they just drafted, a lot of talent there, but he also had a lot of injury issues in 2021. So you'd like to think that he can step in and play that big role, but I don't know that you can be absolutely confident about it given those injury issues. So draft is always a good way to pick up those edge rushers, even if you get down to the 3rd round or something like that. There's usually some quality there depending on the year. The Rams have had pretty good success drafting in those middle rounds. So I think they could find somebody there pretty good up front. When you start with Aaron Donald, you're not doing too bad. And Sebastian Joseph Day, Michael Brockers, they like those two guys. So I'd really look at that linebacker position as one where they could make some upgrades. It
is. I mean, to have this kind of stars and scrubs approach with Donald and Ramsey, at least they're doing it with two guys that can truly, Donald, no one's facing a double team on that defensive line. And with Ramsey, he's one of the only number 1 cornerbacks in the league that will consistently, go in the slide, then go outside, travel with the number 1 corner, whatever they need him to do, he can do it. So makes sense that, let Ramsey take the toughest assignment, maybe add some pass rush juice to replace Floyd, otherwise bring back arguably the single best defense in the entire league. So great stuff there. Edge rush, secondary, and then offensive line, as you said, 3 main team needs. Now we'll get to the gut feel round again. We're recording this on February 2nd. So if things change, we'll adjust from then on. But Rich does not know everything that's going to happen this offseason, but we'll try to get the most that we can out of him. So want to start off with a look at the wide receivers. You mentioned this as a potential sneaky need. Josh Reynolds could be taking his talents elsewhere. Van Jefferson flash, but I agree with you. He's not necessarily as Brandon Cooks, Sammy Watkins type speed threat. So do you see the Rams likely entering the 2021 season with someone else as their number 3 wide receiver?
Yeah, I kind of do. And it's tough because, Van Jefferson was a really good draft pick, I think, and he fits this offense really well. So it would be tough to kind of say, oh, you're pushing him down to a number 4. But I think, especially bringing in Matthew Stafford, and I think Sean McVay has his eye on, getting back to a little bit more of that deep passing game. They evolved, the offense evolved this year to where they kind of went to that, they were big on yards after catch, and it makes a lot of sense because those guys are so good at it. Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp, they can take a slant and turn it into a 40-yard, run. And it made a lot of sense. It just didn't work all around for the offense. So I think they're going to look to maybe evolve back to a little bit more of that concept that they had in 2017 and 2018. And I think to do that, you do need a little bit more speed on the outside. So it's tough because you really like Van Jefferson, and I think he could have a good role on this team, and he still could. But when you look at putting somebody out there on the outside, I think it probably has to be somebody from outside. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, look, you can say a lot of things about Matthew Stafford, but one thing you cannot question is that dude's arm strength. He has 11 completions where the ball went at least 50 yards in the air since entering the league. No, Aaron Rodgers is at 8. Nobody else is like even close to them. So truly, get him someone speedy that, you know, he's not going to be able to overthrow. Good things should be happening. And that kind of takes me to my next question here, because we've seen Sean McVay kind of tweak the offense from year to year. It's like the most run heavy, most 2 tight end heavy addition in 2020. But now Gerald Everett leaving, Matthew Stafford, someone that has that arm strength. You're talking about maybe adding a field stretching wide receiver. Like, could you see McVay kind of getting back more into that 2017, 2018, more downfield heavy offense?
Yeah, I really can. Yeah. And again, I think they tried to, and it made a lot of sense. And, you know, the things that he tried to do last year, you know, they were trying to readjust and maybe trying to manage some of Jared Goff's, you know, weaknesses and things like that, and trying to make it an efficient offense. Like everything he did, it made sense. It didn't really work, and complicated by the fact that Jared turned the ball over too many times with the interceptions and the fumbles. And, you know, the running game a little bit inconsistent because, you know, guys were in and out of the lineup, and you didn't have a real consistent back until the end of the season. So it just didn't quite work. And now bringing in Matthew Stafford to this offense, I think it changes the whole look of the offense. I don't think it makes any sense to put Stafford in the same type of system that they were running last year. It made a certain amount of sense for Jared Goff. I don't think it makes any sense for Stafford. So yeah, I do look for them to get back to some of those concepts that they had in 2017 and 2018. And you could make the argument that the guys they have can already do that. I mean, you know, Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, these are not slow guys. I mean, these are not, you know, but they also aren't, you know, they aren't Brandon Cooks. They aren't Sammy Watkins. So if Sean McVay thinks he needs that, and I think the outside perception is that they kind of do, then that's why I think you need to make that change. But to answer your question overall, yeah, I would expect them to kind of revert or re-evolve, I guess, back to what they were doing quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, look, we would hope that every team would build their offense around their players' talents and not necessarily whatever scheme they've known throughout their entire coaching career. Good to see Sean McVay has already in his short, you know, head coaching career been willing to tweak things, try to set up his guys for success with whatever they have best available. And that kind of takes me to the tight end question, which, because, you know, in fantasy land, Tyler Higbee was someone that burnt a ton of us last year. He had such an unreal hot stretch at the end of the 2019 season. He was going as like a top 8 option. And I mean, he made the most of his opportunities. It was just pretty much split right down the middle with him and Gerald Everett. So if Everett is out of the picture, and then if we think they're going back to more 3 wide receiver sets, could you see Higbee having, you know, almost like a post hype breakout year?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, he might end up being kind of a sneaky kind of, you know, after the big disappointment. Yeah. I think people got too high on him last year. You know, I didn't draft him. Let's put it that way. Because I kind of thought people got a little too excited about that end of 2019 run, where that was a lot of out of necessity, and the Rams just weren't moving the ball very well. And Jared had a good connection with Tyler Higbee. So that made sense to me at the time. I didn't really project it to be a huge, like, you know, there was talk like, oh, Tyler Higbee could be 1,000-yard receiver. Like I wasn't really buying into that. So I do think there could be a little bit of that. Now you can buy lower on him because he still can be a guy. And like you said, Gerald Everett likely being out of the picture. So whatever targets do go to the tight end in 2021, likely a overwhelming share of them will be going to Tyler Higbee. And he still does have those skills. He's great in the red zone. I thought they could have utilized him more than they did this year in certain situations. So yeah, I don't know whether I would go so far as to saying like, yeah, you should consider him a top 5 tight end or something like that. But I think there's more value there than people are going to be willing to maybe to give him this year.
Yeah, as we like to say on this podcast, we don't hate players. We hate average draft positions. So last year, Tyler Higbee, when he's going as a legit top 5, top 6 option, like, no, that's someone at the very high ceiling, you know, the range of their outcomes that we're drafting him at. Now, if he's outside the top 10, we know he can be that great guy. Maybe now he'll actually get the opportunity to be it more consistently. So want to close out the offense with a look at Cam Akers. Our PFF fantasy team could not be higher on this guy at the moment. Every time I look at my ranks, I'm moving him up more and more. Now, he's another guy who had, had, a strong late season run, and we got to make sure that it wasn't just a fluke and he's going to come back into 2021, hopefully with that role. So Malcolm Brown, maybe they bring him back on a team friendly deal. We'll see. I know Henderson was banged up towards the end of the year, but not the whole stretch. What do you think Cam Akers' normal role is going to look like in 2021?
Yeah, I think, and again, this is another guy who had some kind of knick-knack injury issues, which is a thing to watch. You hope that doesn't continue. I mean, one of them was kind of a fluke. He hurt his ribs, he fell on the ball and was out for a little while. So that's a fluke thing. But he's also had, some ankle issues and things like that. So that's something to keep an eye on. You hope that doesn't become a trend. But assuming he makes the progression the way that we think he will, I think it's really setting up for him to take over those lead back duties. And I think what makes sense is, and it's not a knock on Darrell Henderson, but I think it sets up well for Cam Akers to be your lead back, and then for Darrell Henderson to play that complementary role, which was what he was really drafted to do. He wasn't drafted to be a lead back. He really wasn't drafted to even be a 50-50 kind of back. He was supposed to be a complement with some of the skills that he has, and he's very good at catch and run and even getting in there on a third down and making something happen. So I don't think he gets marginalized totally. I don't think he leaves the rotation completely. But I think you do see more of a migration to what you saw in the latter part of the season with Cam Akers, where he really is taking hold of that and getting the bulk of the carries. Malcolm Brown, if they do bring him back, I think it's a good move. He's a kind of your quintessential backup running back. Very knows the offense very well. Great blocker, very steady guy. So he's a good guy to have, but I don't know whether you want to necessarily have him in there for 10, 12 carries a game. So I think in an ideal world, Cam Akers is your lead guy. You sprinkle in a little bit of Darrell Henderson, and then you kind of have Malcolm Brown as kind of that handcuff or that security blanket in case you need him.
So maybe not that same, near every snap role that we saw Todd Gurley have, but at least it should be a more clearly defined backfield than that three-headed mess we had for a lot of last season.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's the way it's trending. And I think it would have trended even stronger toward that if Cam Akers had been healthy during the year. Those injuries that he had, I think, just kind of set everything back. It was like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And then not till the end of the season did we really kind of see it. So I think it'll be, again, you'll have Darrell Henderson in there a little bit. So it won't be like, 25 carries to 2 or something like that. But it'll be a bigger split than what you saw early in the season.
I'm putting more fuel on that Cam Akers RB1 rocket the second we get done here. That's great to hear. Always looking for those true 3-down backs. I understand why teams want to keep their guys fresh. It makes sense, but we want those touches any way we can get it in fantasy land. Last question for you here. Want to look a little bit at the defense. So, we talked about this a little before, the third spot mainly devoted to pass rush, but if they could really spend up, really just try to get a stud, do you think they would kind of want to go with another edge rusher just to replace Floyd? Or do you think it might be, more of a versatile linebacker? Because again, when we have Donald and we have Ramsey, I know there's only so much you could do. So I guess among that front 7, what spot would you most want to upgrade?
Yeah, if it's me, especially talking about maybe a more veteran player, I would look inside. They had some injury issues there too. I mean, they have a couple guys who they like. I mean, Micah Kaiser's a very, very smart player, but I think they need a little bit more athleticism there inside, especially facing some of these offenses that they face in the NFC West. And when it comes to things like even covering tight ends or covering running backs and things like that. I mean, that was one thing they really lost when Corey Littleton left for the Raiders, is just that kind of that sideline to sideline ability to really cover. So I don't know whether that's easier. I would look at both of those things, the inside and the outside. I don't know which is easier to replace in the draft. I tend to think if you can have somebody who's a little bit more experienced in that inside position, who's done it before, who is familiar with the speed of the NFL and that sort of thing, I tend to think that's a little bit better of an option. And maybe you look toward the draft for the edge rusher, a little bit more of an instinctual position. But we'll see. They don't have a lot of money, like you said, so they might be picking the dimes out of the couch, trying to see what they can get. But in an ideal world, I would look at at upgrading that inside spot.
And I know it's tough right now. I mean, again, February 2nd, but with Brandon Staley, taking his talents elsewhere, do you expect the Rams to try to, okay, I know they're going to evolve a little bit, but are we going to see more like, a similar scheme next year? Because, hey, why would you change it when it worked that well?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's the understanding. Raheem Morris will bring in his own little tweaks here and there. He might have different thoughts on certain personnel, but I don't think they want, and I don't think it would be smart because then you're looking at a third defensive system in 3 years.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's a real smart thing to do, especially, we don't know what this offseason is going to look like. Hopefully there are in-person OTAs and things like that, but we don't know how that's going to go. So I think it would be smart for them on the basic level. Like you said, don't mess with what's been working. The players really seem to enjoy the system. They seem to thrive in it. It obviously worked well for your 2 stars. They had great seasons. So there's no real fundamental reason to mess with that, at least right now. And I do think that's the Rams' understanding that Raheem Morris will come in and not make really wholesale changes to what's been going on.
Love when these teams make rational decisions, and it's tough to assume across the league. But even Sean McVay, I felt like they were going to feature one running back to start the year, even though McVay, I've been saying all summer, we like 3 or 4 running backs. We're going to use these guys. So, even when he didn't quite make the coaching decision that us fantasy people wanted, he was still sticking to his word. So appreciate that and appreciate the Rams doing what they are going to do well, hopefully again. Rich, great stuff. Do you have an offseason bowl call you'd like to share with us?
I think, for the off season, I think you see a lot of turnover. I mean, that's going to be the big thing the Rams have said that they still have a model that can bring them back. John Johnson could bring them back. Leonard Floyd. I don't see it. I honestly don't. I think that it's going to be tough for them to get even back under that cap number. You're going to see some restructures. You're probably going to see a couple guys move money around. Aaron Donald, even Matthew Stafford. I think they're going to have to reevaluate what they do there just to get inside that number. But I think other than that, we're looking at a pretty standard offseason. I don't see. I think we've had our big surprise for the offseason in Stafford, but maybe throw it out there. Maybe that second round pick ends up being that big play receiver rather than kind of trying to fill holes or being prudent about it or things like that. Maybe they take a big swing with that second round pick and see who they can get. So that would probably be about as spicy as I get with my predictions right now.
I think that's fair. And to your point, it's hard to think of something more bold than trading, 3 picks in your franchise quarterback already. So I hear you there. Rich, thank you so much for the time, man. Again, everyone, you can go find Rich on Twitter at Rich_Hammond. Got anything you want to express out to the people you got coming up?
No, I appreciate your guys' work over there too. It's awesome. Enjoy it so much. And just our 11 Personnel podcast. You can find that on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. And it's going to be a fun off season. So we'll be covering it well into the summer. So thanks a lot for having me. Appreciate it.
Great stuff, man. Yes, make sure you check out the entire team over there at the Athletic L.A. Gotta love that entire company and what they have helped done for the industry over the years. He's Rich. I'm Ian. This has been the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. And until next time, take care, everybody.